We will use the chat feature to gather questions in addition to the questions that were submitted via the RSVP form. Thank you for those. We've consolidated those into some consistent themes that were shared by many. We want to respond to those here and also add them to our FAQ document so that we're keeping a running record of those things as well. Before we start, what we've done is, again, just a brief presentation that we'll run through, and then we'll start answering some of the questions that have been asked. Again, trying to predict what some of the common questions are. But I want to start, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Don Angelaccio, superintendent. And in addition to that, I am a husband of a second grade teacher, the parent of a second grade special ed teacher, the parent of an ECDEC teacher, early childhood, parent of a junior in college at Illinois State University, and my youngest is Patrick, and he just graduated from Palatine High School. So I, like you, am navigating this pathway as a parent as well. My youngest, Patrick, going off to school for the first time. You know, we're debating whether or not he lives on campus or participates remotely. We're watching Tennessee, just like you're watching the news as well. So I very much so empathize with the position that our parents are in. We recognize that these are all unprecedented and uncharted waters that we're in. The pledge that we make to you is simply that we are going to do our very best to offer what we believe will be the best for our ability, our capacity, and that we will be as transparent throughout that process and communicate with you throughout that process. Obviously, I can't guarantee that we will be designing a program that everyone is going to love. We've got very different needs in our community. Different families approach things differently. And as you can imagine, we have folks that run the spectrum from how come schools were closed in the first place to I wouldn't send my student back till 2022. And all of those we need to treat with, all of those different perspectives we need to treat with respect and understanding and compassion. Because we're not walking in one another's shoes. So I simply say that because we know that the process that we're going through, we're not going through alone. We share that with schools across the globe, let alone in our region and across the United States, of really reinventing what school looks and feels like since March 17th. So, I thank you again for participating, and we will jump into the presentation now, and we will answer some questions after that. I'm sorry, I'm getting texts in. It looks like we reached our 100-person limit. We only had 83 RSVP. So let's post, Maria, would you mind posting something that says the meeting will be recorded and available later? And if any non-parents other than my exec board and board of ed, if you guys want to jump off, Brian, you would stay. Maria, if you could stay, Amy, then that'll free up about another 7 or 8 spots. We also have some faculty. If you would disconnect, we're going to do our staff FAQ town hall next week, Monday. So we'll try to answer your questions. That'll open up, again, another handful of spots for some parents to join. Thank you very much. Now we're dropping and adding as we go. We'll wait just another minute, try to let some of those other parents join us. Okay. Again, welcome and thank you. Can you quiet the dogs down? That'd be helpful. All right. So we're all currently governed by the Restore Illinois plan. As you know, we are currently in phase 4 in Illinois. The news conference that came out today from the governor was that we have switched from 5 regions across the state to now 11 regions. So it helps to be more targeted in action steps that the state may need to take in terms of progressing or regressing based on the data. We are in the suburban Cook region now. Chicago is its own region. All of the rest of Cook County is in another region that we are in. So we are not with Lake and McHenry, and we're not with DuPage, Kane, etc. So that means that the data that's more regional or more or directly connected to our communities are the ones that'll be used to make the decisions for the progression through the phases. It has been made clear to all of the superintendents, all of the planning committees across the state that we should prepare for progression or regression. And I think again, when we began this process in March, April, and began looking toward the fall, we were all in a very different place. It's very disheartening to see the numbers increasing. So we need to be prepared to regress to phase 3, which would have one implication, to see what the guidance is for phase 4. And then of course, eventually we all hope to return to phase 5, which is more of a restored state. The other factors that go into our plan are the guidance from the Illinois Department of Public Health, IDPH. I will reference them quite a bit. The Illinois State Board of Education, ISBE, sorry, we love our acronyms in education. They're the governing body for school districts, public school districts in Illinois. And we've also been working closely with the neighboring districts and District 214 in the North Cook region, so that our plans are as aligned as possible, because we have a lot of interactive work that goes on, and a lot of crossover of decision making. So I say that to share that our decision is not made in isolation. This is the most troubling slide to me, because we really don't know what to predict as we move forward. So our approach to this has been to be as flexible as possible in our mindset, to remain adaptable, to remain responsive to the changing conditions around us. There are many decisions that are out of our control, and there are changing conditions, sort of like aiming at a moving target. So we need to be prepared for that flexibility. I think we all hope that the worst is behind us in Illinois, that we've had that surge in the spring, we shut down, we flatten the curve, and the long-term prognosis is that the worst of it is behind us. I think what we're seeing in terms of the data currently is that we're beginning to see a mid-summer resurgence, not necessarily a late fall resurgence. There was data to suggest that a second wave of pretty significant transmission could come, and there was discussion that that would be during flu season. And according to the data that I'm looking at, and that you've probably seen on the news across the country, it looks like we're headed toward a summer resurgence. And then, of course, until there's a vaccine and until there are treatments, we are likely to see differing waves of closures due to very localized scenarios that can open and close and open and close. So we are prepared for all 3 of these, most realistically currently looking at a resurgence, but our poised in our planning to pivot to address any of those different scenarios. As we planned our key factors, obviously health and safety is a key component for us. As I said, we're parents, we're siblings, we're children, we're spouses, and you know, the health and safety of our faculty, as well as, of course, our children and our community are key components for us in our consideration. Teaching and learning is our primary purpose, and not only now do we have typical growth that we hope to support and guide our children through, but we have some learning slide that we need to make up. And so we really have to focus on the most effective, most meaningful use of our time to make up some of those learning slides. We all know that we don't operate in a vacuum, and that all of you as parents, as employees, as bosses, have lives outside of school, and we need to be sensitive to the impact of our decision making. And we know that factors such as daycare, such as needing to go back to work, such as your own medical health and your own family values are obviously extremely important. And then we also need to make sure that our plan is something we can actually implement, that we can afford to do, and that it's at a level of complexity that we can carry out. If we develop a plan that's too complex, that we don't have enough time to plan and prepare for, then we're sort of destined for failure. So those four factors really led us back in March and April to start our Back to School Blueprint committee. It's made up of more than 55 staff, administrators, community members, and students. They are able to review our plan and have been participating in some subgroups. First, we looked at phase 2 and phase 3, in which case we would be limited to no more than 10 in phase 3 in any one location, which would require schools to be closed, which would then push us back into distance learning. And we wanted to take a deep look at what worked well in the spring and those areas where we know we fell short, where we did our best, but it really didn't cut it. So we wanted to make sure that we identified those things that we need to improve upon, so that this distance learning 2.0 really is a completely revamped model, not really resembling what we did in the spring at all. Of course, in phase 4, we were targeted with, you know, the challenge of how do we reopen, and how do we do that in as safe a way as possible? How do we design instruction and address that learning slide, that learning loss? We also are keenly aware of the social emotional learning needs of our students, having lived through a very bizarre, minimally bizarre, if not traumatic experience at home, the isolation, the social distance. So we know that there are some needs there that we need to support in our students. And one of the key factors for us was wanting to make sure that we were providing as many options for our families as possible, knowing, of course, that no two families are exactly alike. The dream someday will be that we'll reach phase 5, in which case the schools will be open with limited restrictions. We'll be pretty much back to full operations. And then the question really is, what is the new normal? What are those components from the last year that we have learned that are actually really helpful tools, like Zoom meetings? I'd never really been on too many Zoom meetings before this, and now I really see the value in being able to have a meeting like this and have 100 people online and connect with parents from my own home with my dogs barking. And that's a great tool. So in what ways do we use those tools to make our experience as a school community even better? So I want to start with a pledge to you about our communications plan. We have developed a Back to School Blueprint website that is connected on the home page of the district, as well as it's the first tab under parents and students. It has an overview, it has an FAQ that we're updating frequently. It has some information about our Distance Learning 2.0, as well as a link for feedback, comments, questions that we will continually use to inform what you're concerned about so that we can respond appropriately. So I do encourage you to take a look at that website. We will reference it and link it regularly. It is, there's a lot of information there, obviously, but, and we'll be adding to it, but that really is the place where we can house all of our important information, resources, etc. We're also going to start weekly communications home next Friday, either through the school newsletters or through the district newsletter. They're not going to be as long as the ones that I normally put out once a month, but we will be putting out just sort of an updated message from the district. And then once the administrators are back in the schools in August, we'll start sending out more school-specific information through the newsletters. As necessary, automated calls and emails. As part of our survey, we continued to reinforce that email and text messages and phone calls are helpful ways to get that information. So we will be using that tool as well, especially as significant announcements are made. And then we plan on August 12th to be sending out schedules or homeroom assignments to students, and then by August 14th, have all of our back to school protocols fully developed. We learned of the final decision from the state at the very end of June. So it's been 16, 17 days of working toward developing this plan. So we've been working pretty diligently on what the plan will look like. And now through August 14th, we have a lot of work to do answering questions of, so how are we going to make that happen? So I will tell you now, I'm not going to have every answer to every question that was out there. We're still thinking about them. It's helpful when you ask questions or make comments because it makes us, double back and make sure that we're thinking about things appropriately. So please do use those comments and feedback links to share your thoughts as well. But we will certainly have things up and running by August 14th, which gets us a couple of days before we return to school fully. So as you know, we have decided on two options. Both are equally valid and rigorous. There's obviously pros and cons to each of those options. We wanted to develop this primarily because of the choice that we have heard from families, that there was a need for that. I understand that a third option that is typically known as a hybrid model is discussed, and it is something that we did look at. It is really effective. The hybrid model is effective when social distancing guidelines are required, in terms of you may only have half of the students in class at one time. We felt that hybrid model that we looked at and started developing, should the guidance from the state have gone in that direction, would have been something we implemented. So it is still sort of on the table and in our back pocket should we be directed to move in that direction. But at the current time, we felt that these two options give a little bit more flexibility for families. If we went with that hybrid model, we wouldn't be able to offer the full in-person and hybrid. Would, by default, would create the larger class size and therefore not allow the social distancing. So we felt that these two models were the best options that we had at this time. There are also things that are manageable to us, that we have the capacity in-house to really develop these two as robust plans. The key for us in these, from an instructional standpoint, the key to both of these is the foundation of the homeroom or core group of students. That relationship will be set together at the beginning of the school year, and that group of 21 or 22 students in some different combinations of kids who are home and kids who are in school, or everyone who is at home or everyone who is at school, that they will stay together as a cohort. And that will allow us to really build upon and capitalize on the relationships between teachers and students and their classmates. We think that that's one of the key elements that we needed to instill in our plan. We also felt that this allows us to get the greatest level of instructional impact by focusing on a full in-person model with this connected distance learning. We looked at that hybrid model again and thought that that would be less than what we would hope for the in-person and less than what we would hope for in the distance side of things. And if we needed to, we could obviously do that, but we really felt that this would give us the most robust plan. And obviously IDPH and ISB guidelines suggested what we should think about doing in terms of recommendations, and they outline what we're required to do in terms of those must-dos. We, as I said, also looked at our plan through connections to other districts, particularly District 214. I believe they were going to share their plan tonight. I hope they have at this point, but again, those are obviously impacts for many of our families who have kids at the high school level and with us in District 23. So we wanted to try to be as in sync as possible. And so all of the schools in our area are offering full in-person or distance learning in some combination. At this time, there's nobody in our area that's offering a hybrid model. So we went through all of your FAQs, the comments that you made, and I'm going to try to run through them sort of chronologically here and in terms of the student's experience, and try to respond to as many of the questions or comments as I possibly can, and then we'll answer some questions directly that you have shared. So self-certification. There is a requirement in IDPH that every student be daily checked for COVID symptoms, or that parents and staff and folks working at the district could self-certify that they are not exhibiting any of these signs and symptoms. When we developed this plan a couple of weeks ago, we were sort of in a different place in terms of self-certification, the rise or decline of cases. And we decided on a self-certification model where staff would complete a form that would verify that they are well to come to work, and that parents at home would complete and submit a form saying, yes, my child is free of COVID and available to come to school. We're still working on what that model might look like. The reason we went for that is because obviously that would maximize our instructional time. The testing of every child and every adult as they enter the building would be time taken from instruction. And so we were at the time really thinking about trying to maximize that time. We also know that we need to just trust one another. And that's difficult to do sometimes. That's the old parking lot grocery cart analogy. If people can't even be responsible enough to put their grocery cart back, how are they going to be responsible enough with something as serious as their medical wellness and the wellness of others? But part of what we need to do is to work together to support and to trust that. So that was our thinking when we developed this plan. We are currently reviewing that decision. There are some options for random checks of staff and students to sort of verify. That would be a lesser amount of students. That would be one option. And a third option that we have been discussing that we're still looking at is screening everybody upon arrival to school. That's not off the table in any way, shape, or form. We also obviously will rely heavily on our nurses and the assessments that they will make as they do during the year If somebody came to school and was feeling fine and didn't have any symptoms but develop a fever throughout the day, and the teacher says, "You're not looking so hot," the nurse checks them out, and if they have that fever, if they have those COVID symptoms, then we'd be sending those students home. So that's still a work in progress right now, but that's sort of our best thinking of why we went with self-certification and sort of the options that we're wrestling with right now. Social distancing is obviously one of the key preventative elements. So, but the guidance from the Illinois Department of Public Health is this phrase, "to the greatest extent possible." Now, some folks are interpreting that as the greatest extent possible, so I can only have 6 foot of distance in the building. For us, that would either be half of the kids in the school at a time, or all of the kids, but doubling our space and doubling our staff. Either of those two were problematic. Again, in our region, we are all going with a "to the greatest extent possible," meaning that our full in-person options will likely result in classes that are spaced less than 6 feet, but potentially 3-4 feet. That'll all be based, obviously, on the ratio of parents and families who select in-person versus distance learning. That'll drive the number of kids that are actually coming to school. So if we had a 50-50 self-selection, then we would be 6 feet apart. If we are less than that, if we're 2/3 in person and 1/3 distance, then obviously the classroom size is a little bit lessened. It may be 15 or 16 students and not 20 or 21. So we would be able to spread out within the classroom. The strategy that we're using, again, is called a cohort model, meaning that we're trying to minimize the movement of students throughout the day so that as a class they're together, but that we limit and mitigate exposure between those groups of kids so that they're not interacting with, or we're minimizing the amount to which they are interacting with other students. There are obviously some specific scenarios where one student who needs a potential special ed intervention may join up with another student from a different class for a special ed intervention. Those types of things will occur, but to the extent that we can minimize that, that's our goal. That's easier at the elementary level than it is at the middle school. At the middle school, we will have some movement between groups of students, although we've developed sort of a block schedule to minimize that. But students will move quickly between the classes in the few times where they do move throughout the building. One of the nice things, one of the silver linings on the social distancing guidelines were the reliance of, if we're outside, we can have up to 50 kids as long as they're 6 feet apart, and we can keep that group of 50 kids away from a different group of 50 kids by 30 feet, and they can socially distance. So a lot of our planning and discussion has been on how do we maximize time outside for movement breaks, for the ability just to take the mask off for a while. And so that will be a big part of our plan. That at least gets us hopefully through the early fall and before we start hitting really bad weather, and then we may have to make other decisions. But that's our current plan right now, trying not to get too far into the crystal ball of the future. So the question of masks is a tough one. With this nose, a mask doesn't really fit all that well. The initial guidance that came out said face masks or shields. The Illinois Department of Public Health quickly responded and corrected that and said it's not it is face masks. There's an ability for face shields to be used in specific situations where the students, for example, are deaf and hard of hearing students, may need to see an instructor's mouth to lip read. So that faculty would wear a face shield. Other speech and language pathologists, other teachers who need to be able to make sounds as we're addressing literacy skills, there'll be times where students or staff would wear a face shield. Obviously, there are also medical situations where a face shield is, I'm sorry, a face mask is not tolerated, and we would then allow a face shield. We are currently planning on providing 2 reusable cloth masks for every student. We have ordered a starter number of face shields. I want to say we've ordered 200 that we will use in those specialized situations. So we will have those available where and when needed. And as I said before, movement breaks, mask breaks, that's key. That's become my new favorite part of leaving a store is when you get far enough away from the entrance and away from other people, you can take that mask off and take a deep breath. That's gonna be a challenge for all of us in this new normal. But I think that it's something that we will, and our kids will rise to. You know, I remember the "kids will never be able to" phrase is something that I've heard throughout my educational career. You know, kids will never be able to sit in a car with their seatbelt on. I remember the days laying across the back of my parents' station wagon, and a seatbelt was something that we never even really thought about. And at the time when that became a law, no, kids will never be able to sit. It's too uncomfortable. It's too squirming. And now it's become the norm. I think that we will have to support our kids. We will have to be reasonable, and we will have to be empathetic. We'll have to trust our faculty to use their professional judgment to identify when a student needs that break and to provide those breaks. We'll have to trust that when kids make mistakes and they take their face mask off and twirl it around, that's a reteachable moment for us. We know that that's just normal child development. So that's something that we're, again, we really don't have any flex on that from the guidance, but it is an important component of the mitigation of the virus and virus suppression from a health and safety standpoint. The key component in terms of instruction is really the part that will look and feel the most normal from an in-person standpoint. As after students get into the classroom, we will provide our full complement of our instruction. We have prioritized reading, math, interventions, and acceleration, so sort of that individualized time, as well as social emotional learning, to be key and essential components of the school day. But we've also continued to support the whole child curriculum. We know that math, that PE and music and art are just as important as some of those more academic focused subjects. And so we'll be providing all of our specials and exploratory curriculum at MacArthur. Although again, that may look a little bit different. It may be a little shorter than some of our other subject areas. And again, as I said, part of our responsibility will be to teach students what this new normal is. As we have new expectations, we need to teach those expectations. And as we, as adults, come to learn what are my coping strategies for wearing this mask, we need to teach our kids coping strategies for wearing a mask, for not if they don't understand something somebody said because they have a mask on. You know, that's a new strategy that we need to support our kids in learning. Many of the questions that you had were about logistics. We will have frequent hand washing throughout the day. It's built into our schedule for students. There are hand washing breaks built in upon entry, before and after meal, before and after leaving the classroom, and then before dismissal, minimally. Hand sanitizers will be available at all of the entrances, exits, as well as in every classroom where hand washing may not be as readily available from a time perspective. We're looking at our supply lists. We know that back to school shopping, I was just at Mariano's yesterday and saw them converting the summer stuff was all on clearance, and the back to school supplies were hitting the shelves, always an indicator of the turning of the calendar. We are working on updating that supply list with some additional items that we'll offer and invite families to provide for your own child, including, obviously your own reusable face masks, face shields. If you would like to provide that for your child, that's fine as well. As well as, personal hand sanitizer and those types of things. We are looking to minimize the number of the supplies that we carry around in our backpack every day, while making sure that each child has the essential tools that he or she will need for themselves, because the communal sharing of the pencil box is something that we're not allowed to do in this situation. So we're going to need to make sure that we pack sort of the essentials for kids as they'll be carrying those things around, without creating that 50-pound backpack that pulls kids over. They can't stand up straight. Lunch is obviously a big challenge in this new environment. We have moved with our food service provider to lunch in the classrooms or an alternate space, no more than 50 kids in a spot. We will social distance to the greatest extent possible again. Obviously, while we're eating, masks are off. Food options through our food service provider will be both hot and cold options. Purchases will be only through mealtime, as we won't have cash going back and forth. And we're still working on the specifics of how to order that and how to get it delivered to the classroom. But our goal will be to provide that time in each of our classrooms for the delivery of that food. And then obviously the hand washing, consumption of food, cleanup, and then movement breaks and back on to the rest of the day. We will share more information about that. Obviously, the kids who bring their own lunches will continue to do so and store their lunch in their backpacks. At MacArthur, the age-old stress about memorizing my locker combination is off the table, at least for the start of this year, as we are not going to have students use the hallway lockers. They're not going to use the PE lockers, and in fact, there will be no changing for PE. Those, again, are all ISB guidance elements, at least in the interim, until we get further down to a healthier spot that no lockers and no changing for PE will be a part of the new norm. And other than parents who have specific appointments or are attending a specific meeting, we'll be limiting guest and visitor access to the building. Only verified vendors who are screened and tested before they arrive will be allowed in the building, so that we're minimizing the external presence in the building as well. Cleaning protocols will look a little bit different. I would say we've done a pretty good job of this already, but we have made some strategic changes as well as some staffing changes to improve coverage. We've done a great job already, deep cleaning. We've got the construction projects almost finished. The parking lot at MacArthur is done. The gym and the stage at MacArthur are finished. The HVAC work that's done at Ross and Sullivan is almost finished. So we're ready from a building perspective. We have increased staff in our custodial department. We'll be prioritizing frequently throughout the day, high touch, high traffic areas. And then daily cleaning and disinfection throughout the entire building. And then as another part of our plan, staff and student safe cleaning solutions will be provided in each classroom. And we're gonna need to share some of that responsibility for maintaining a clean environment. When I was an elementary student at St. Isaac Jogues in Niles, at the end of every school year, we had to take our Brillo pad and our spick and span and carry our desks outside and clean the top and bottom. And that we just did that because that was what needed to be done. They didn't have the staff to clean every desk. And I think, again, that sort of community spirit has been something that District 23 has done a great job in, and so sort of cleaning up your area after lunch, wiping down your desk is something that we think that will be an important part of our cleaning protocols, just to make sure that we're able to maintain as clean and healthy a environment as possible. So many questions also on this topic of suspected or positive cases. There's an important difference, obviously, between a suspected case and a positive case. Suspected cases are just that. They're not verified. Students who are suspected are home. They are directed to go be tested, and then awaiting that test result. Or if the symptoms prove not to be COVID related, then they come back. But positive cases obviously are treated differently. So we will be continuing to rely on self-reporting, as well as kids and staff staying home who are ill in any way, which is always our case, but particularly here. And then also we would be notified by the Illinois Department of Public Health if someone doesn't report to us but is tested and proven positive. The new guidelines for fever, even for non-COVID cases, now is a 72-hour stay at home until fever-free without medication, and then monitoring those symptoms. That's up from 24 hours. And the key, I know there were many questions about what about if this happens, what about if this person is tested? Let me explain it hopefully in the broadest terms, so that, because all of the scenarios run through this metric. Close contact is considered less than 6 feet for more than 15 minutes. So passing through the hallway past another group is obviously less than 15 minutes. But sitting in a classroom for more than 15 minutes, where I may be less than 6 feet away, is considered close contact. So any individual who has had close contact with a positive test will be required for 14-day quarantine. So that can mean if an individual in a classroom is tested positive, that the other students who were in close proximity for more than 15 minutes during that window of time would go to be quarantined for 14 days and monitor symptoms. In that case, whenever a student would leave the in-person setting, they would join the distance learning module, assuming that they're medically, well enough to participate. So that is seamless instruction. It would be with the same group of kids. It would be with the same teacher, only from home now, if not instead of at school. That's true for staff as well, that as staff if a staff member, for example, had close contact with a family member who tested positive, then that staff member would have to quarantine for 14 days. So that's obviously a tricky component, and there are lots of dominoes that can fall if cases become more and more positive. I would simply say that beyond a random case here and there, if we end up in a position where there are multiple positive cases, we are likely not alone in that situation, and we would likely be seeing positivity rates in our region exceed the 5%, and therefore the whole area is shutting down. If the high school, for example, were to have an outbreak, it's gonna impact relatives, families, the rest of us. So that's, again, one of those important components in terms of being flexible. We will rely on IDPH to guide our contact tracing. We are not epidemiologists. As my mother has told me, I'm a doctor, just not that kind of doctor, not a real one. And so we're not going to try to take that on ourselves without the guidance and direction from IDPH. They are the experts. We are required to follow their guidelines. So we would be following their direction in terms of contact tracing. And then notification as well, obviously, will be a critical component. We need to tell people as soon as possible that we've had cases, and we need to be responsive to that by sharing that information out as appropriate and as directed. So that's a key component that we would comply with as well. So that's the option for in-person instruction. And I should clarify for our early childhood kindergarten students who are scheduled for the half-day section, it's fully in school for half the day, not a full day of early childhood or kindergarten instruction. And I apologize, I know there was some confusion about that. The distance learning 2.0 is really the model that we developed upon reflection of the data that was submitted through our surveys, through the feedback we had from parents, staff, and students. Two of the most important things we heard regularly were that we need more of a routine and a schedule to distance learning should it continue, that we know what to expect further in advance, that we know how to plan for our home routine further in advance. So we've developed a schedule that really matches in-person instruction to the greatest extent possible. Obviously, there are some family situations that can't participate because of their children will not be physically home and able to access instruction because of their parent schedule. But for those kids that are home, unfortunately for some of our middle school kids who enjoyed the sleeping until noon portion of the spring version of distance learning, they're going to have to be up and present in first period when the classmates who are in school are present for first period, because our goal, technology providing and allowing, is to live stream that classroom experience to the greatest extent possible. Where we can't do that, we will have some recorded direct instruction as well, and of course then independent work. So from home, students would participate in a very mixed kind of, part of it would be live streaming when the teacher presents the concepts. They introduce a new math skill, for example, and then while everyone is working, okay, now work through these problems, they turn off the computer and are working, or turn off the live stream and are working independently, but they've had that direction and instruction from the classroom teacher. So that's an opportunity then for students to still stay connected to that classroom without sitting in front of a screen for 6 hours. That's not going to happen. There will be a much more rigorous interaction online. There will be a much more consistent interaction online, but there will also be opportunities for at-home movement breaks and non-digital kinds of interaction with the text. We're still prioritizing those same key areas. The classroom teacher will provide the direct instruction, and then when students are not participating in the class instruction, we'll have additional virtual support with other staff checking in on kids, connecting with parents to see how things are going and what additional supports might be necessary. Again, we'll be doing art and music and PE, again, in that virtual way, with likely pre-recorded, if not live streamed content as well. And to help us to get to that, especially from an equity standpoint, we really appreciate, we know what a strain it was in the spring. We used our federal Coronavirus Act's funds, CARES, to purchase one-to-one iPads for all of our students in K through 3. so that whether they're in person at school or at home, everybody has equitable access. We've also used some of those dollars to support professional development, as well as a couple of other components on the back end to strengthen our bandwidth and those types of things. So that was a lot of talking in just about 45 minutes or so. Let me unmute my colleague, Amy Zare. She's the Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction. I also would like to unmute Amy McPartland, our Assistant Superintendent for Finance and Operations, and Director of Buildings and Grounds, Mr. Brian Rominski. And stop sharing my screen and change host to Amy Zare so that you can follow up on any of the chat items. Okay, Amy?
Sounds good.
So
hello, good evening, everybody. Great to have your questions. As Dr. Angelaccio said, he categorized most of your questions into kind of those big chunks of, face masks and things like that. Here are some more specific questions that we got through the sign-up form when you signed up for this Q&A session. So I'm gonna start firing them off. The first one is, will this school year be as rigorous as a typical school year?
No. It just won't. It's not a typical year. And I think that that's one of the harsh and difficult realities for all of us to face, that starting on March 13th, 12th, our normal has changed. Our typical has changed. If it weren't, we wouldn't be having this live streaming, and we wouldn't be, talking about reinventing education. Will it be rigorous? Yes, absolutely. Are we doing our best to create an environment that is consistent and a deep, multifaceted curriculum? Absolutely. But I want to dissuade the notion that whatever we're doing is trying to be what we were pre-COVID. We're all dealing with work changes and life changes, environmental changes, systemic changes. And so we are trying to make the best lemonade that we can out of our current lemon. So it's not going to be what it was before. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be our best effort.
Okay, can twins be put in the same class to reduce exposure?
Yeah, we talked about this morning. Our leadership team has been meeting throughout the summer. One of the topics we had today was this one. We will be reaching out to families of twins, and our recommendation is that we place them together. We have typically not done that, trying to give kids their own space, but in the spirit of consistency and minimizing exposure, where we have twins, triplets, we don't have any quadruplets in the district now, but we do have triplets. We'll be reaching out to those folks and asking parents if they would be okay if we schedule those students together.
Okay. Will e-learning students have the opportunity to meet their teacher in a socially distanced way at the beginning of the school year?
Yeah, so we also discussed what back to school nights would look like, the meet the teacher nights would look like. Obviously, that's going to be in a different capacity. We've talked about doing some pre-recorded presentations as part of our support for parents, understanding what is going on in the district and in school, whether it's in person or in the distance learning setting. But we're also looking at trying to set up some ways for kids and teachers to interact with one another prior to the school year starting, as we've tried to do in the past. Whether it's distance or in person, that group of students are going to work together. So building that relationship is a big part of our plan.
Okay. if the chosen mode of schooling is not working out, then can the students switch from online to in-person or vice versa, even after the school year has started?
Yeah, so that's one of the areas where our plan differs from some of our neighbors. We've built in a couple of on or off ramps, however you want to look at it, throughout the plan. At any point, a student who or family who becomes uncomfortable or unable to continue to participate in live instruction, if that was your selection, would be able to automatically move to remote learning. We're asking families that select the remote learning option to give us a couple of weeks of time to get our routine going and get our feet under ourselves with the whole new scenario of who's at home and who's in school. And then at the midpoint of the first trimester, a little bit before that, so like 3 weeks in, we'll be asking families who are interested in either continuing with remote learning to select that, or to say, okay, I've seen kind of what it's going to look like. I've heard from other kids, from other parents of kids who are there. I would like to make the move, to have that ability to move to the in-person instruction. And then we'll be revisiting that depending on the broader scenario of cases and opening more or closing more to provide options at each of the grading mark periods. So it is a flexible plan, although not daily flexible, but it is intended to give parents those on and off ramps. Some of our neighboring districts, not to throw anybody under the bus, but others are saying it's a whole year commitment, and we just felt that was too long to throw out there. So we know this is uncertain. We know that many of you are weighing options heavily back and forth, and I like I said, with my son, I don't know if he's going to stay there all year, but our decision was we're going to send him in the middle of August, and if he comes back earlier than that, then Thanksgiving, then great. If not, we'll see him at Thanksgiving. But we at least, we had to make that decision a couple of weeks ago now, but we know you're all in that same boat.
Okay, the next one is about instruments. Do they need to carry these with them throughout the day, or for orchestra in middle school?
Yeah, we're still working on what band and orchestra looks like in a digital way. We know our programs were phenomenal in the spring in terms of some really creative remote concerts and some collaboration done over the internet. But so we may be minimizing the number of instrument offerings so that we can group kids a little bit better. But no, the instruments themselves are going to be in the band or orchestra room and available for kids as they're doing their whole group instruction. We are likely looking at some kind of mix of before and after school remote sectional instruction, because we don't want kids pulled from their the prioritized core academic classes, but we do want them to have that important fine arts experience. So we're still trying to work with our band and orchestra and choral directors to map all of that out, but we definitely want to make that happen.
Okay. As large companies are continuing to require their individuals to adhere to travel restrictions or to self-quarantine if they do travel, will this be implemented for the staff, administration, and families opting for in-person learning?
Yeah, the answer to that is at this time, no. At this time, that is not statewide or IDPH guidance. That is local decision, and the city of Chicago, most notably, has made that decision. But that is becoming more and more something that we know IDPH is looking at. And I would not be surprised if a mandate like that were to come down from the governor's office or from the state departments that says we need to do that. So at this time, that's not required, and we're not planning to do that. But if we need to, then we would flex to the e-learning for those kids that were planning on being in person, and then they would return to in person after their quarantine.
Okay, why are temperature checks not being done?
This is just water, I promise. Temperature checks are not being done primarily because of the pull away from instructional time. As I said before, that process of screening every individual before they come into the building is logistically challenging. We have already decided to open each building to have a minimum of 4 entrances so that we can divide the groups up. We're looking at screening or checking kids as they come off of buses, but all of our walkers and car riders and bike riders, we need to figure out a way to screen those students without them having to queue up in a line that takes 45 minutes to get through. That was our original thinking. We're currently looking at that as an option and trying to figure out what would it require. We've already secured, Amy McPartland already purchased all of the no-touch thermometers, so we have that equipment. It's more a management issue at this point. But again, we're still working through in our wellness committee those 3 options. So we may pivot to do some version of that in the near future. But currently we're weighing the need to do that with the loss of instructional time. Okay.
For both e-learning and in-person learning, how will the students be assessed individually?
Do you mind if I kick this one back to you since you're in charge of assessment? I know we're talking about doing our Fast Bridge, which is our universal screener and assessment.
Yeah.
But you know better than I what we're going to do with that. So do you mind responding to
Yeah.
that?
It's going to be very important in the beginning of the year for us to see where we are with our students and what their needs are. They're calling this whole time period in the spring that the students might be experience what they're calling like the COVID slide. And so we really are going to work on trying to assess the students in the beginning of the year. Most of the companies like FastBridge that our students have taken, and other companies have retooled the way they're able to give the assessment. So if you choose distance learning, they're giving us directions on how we can have the students take that at home. Now it's really going to be very important that we keep parents in the loop of there can't be any helping the students on the test, because we really need to see where the students are so that we can provide those extra supports and provide the stretch material for enrichment where needed. So we really need the students, if they're going to be taking the assessment at home, to be kind of on their own, trying to do this the best way possible. And that's information we'll be giving out to both the students in person and at home, so we're able to see where everybody is.
So the at-home assessments that many of the college students took collaboratively would be discouraged by us.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Sure. If I'm able to bring my kids to school in the morning to help limit the number of students on the bus, can they still take the bus home?
Yeah, that's a good question. As we said in the form, obviously transportation is going to be capped at 50 kids on a bus as well. Wearing masks, so wherever possible. We know that's not always possible by any stretch, but if it's possible, we're asking folks to drive or walk, at least initially. Amy McPartland, you're in charge of transportation. Since I'm in the shoveling questions off, can you respond a little bit more about transportation and whether they could select to take the bus home in a scenario like that?
Yep. So right now we're working with First Student to make sure that we are achieving the less than 50 students, including the driver and any additional staff that need to be on the bus. right now, our goal is to get those routes down to the numbers that we need them to be at. So it's something that potentially, if a student's route is currently below that capacity, and we could get a commitment from the parent that it would be a daily thing, we're not in a position to be able to offer, on and off in a discretionary way. So if we could get a commitment from the parent that it would have to be an everyday PM ride home only, then that's something that we could potentially work with, provided that there's available capacity on that bus.
Can you also talk about community stops? That was something
Sure.
that we were working on throughout last year in response to the challenges of and the concerns of many of our families, and we're going to implement that anyway because we feel it's
Right.
safer and better for kids and families. But can you describe a little
Sure.
bit about that for busing?
Of course. So one of the really the most frequently heard concern raised by parents was the frustration that their Ike student has a pickup location on this corner, and that their Mac or their Ross and Sullivan student may have another pickup location that could be 2 blocks in the other direction. So we've worked with First Student to develop a system of community stops. And what that is every corner identified as a stop will serve as a stop for Ike, Ross Sullivan, and MacArthur. So while the stop times for those routes will actually be different based on the destination of the buses, whether it's going to Ike or Mac or Ross Sullivan, the stop location will be the same. So what that looks like really from an implementation standpoint is we have already routed our buses to go to these established stop locations, and then students will be assigned to the closest stop location to their home. And so that it's a way more efficient method of routing the buses, instead of, like I said, instead of retooling the routes every time additional kids come on or go off. These routes will be kind of set, at least for the year, and then ideally for the next couple of years, with some very minor tweaking year to year. But you will know that your student will be at the same stop for all of their Ross Sullivan years, or going into Mac as well. So that's kind of where we're at. First Student has just finished assigning all of the students to those route locations. So we should have something out communicating where your family's stop location will be, I would say, within the next week or so. Once we get the feedback from parents on the 22nd, then we'll go back to First Student and kind of start to place students on buses and to place stop locations on routes. And then we'll have to revisit our numbers. And if that means we need to add a few routes, then we'll look at doing that. In looking currently, we had 11 routes over for Ross Sullivan. We know 8 of those are right at that 50-person threshold, a little bit below some of them, but certainly close enough that they really need to be evaluated. And so we're going to be doing pretty thorough load counts, as well as taking a look to see where those numbers come in around the 22nd.
Yeah, so the community stops, I think, has been something I know I've heard. This is my 9th year in the district. I've heard it for a few years. It just makes sense that a parent can't be in 2 places at once, as much as we might like to be. So I think that'll be hopefully a welcomed change.
Yeah.
All right, next question, Amy.
Okay. Will there be after-school clubs and activities? How about for kids who choose online learning?
So the answer to that is yes. It depends. We're certainly not going to be able to run every club or activity as we have done in the past, but it is our intention to try to run as much as possible, again, whether it's an in-person or a virtual way. So for example, we've talked about the newspaper club at MacArthur. They like to meet at lunchtime and before or after school and sit in the same room and have that conversation, but that activity can occur in a virtual space. So where those activities can occur in virtual spaces, they will. And that would allow anyone, whether they're in-person instruction or distance learning, to continue to participate in some of those other enrichment and extracurricular activities. Similarly, band, orchestra, chorus, those things would be participating in a virtual way if kids are not in person for instruction. Interscholastic sports is the big question as we're all watching the NBA and the NHL and everybody else try to bring sports back. It is my understanding that we are likely to hear that all fall interscholastic sports at the high school level or at the elementary level are going to be canceled for this upcoming fall, which is a heartbreaker for all of the high school football fans for sure, like my boys were. But that doesn't mean that we could not offer a non-competitive, non-interscholastic version of cross country, for example. There are ways that we can get kids running in smaller groups or running independently and sharing times and those types of things. And we did some creative things with clubs and sports in the spring season. So it's really going to be a building by building discussion with the principal and the sponsors of those clubs to try to brainstorm what that can look like. But it's our goal to offer as much of that as possible, because that's one of the kids' favorite parts of school.
Gotcha. This one came from a parent, but it's also one our staff has a lot. So families have been known to medicate a child with a fever and send the child to school. It would be foolish of us to ignore this truth during this critical time.
What?
How will the district handle a situation when a child's medication wears off and there is evidence of a fever during school hours?
All right, in the spirit of full disclosure, as a dad, taking care of my kids when my wife left for work and they said they weren't feeling well, I would give them a glass of water and send them most of the time. You're going to be fine. I know. You know, we're all going to have a heightened awareness of that for ourselves, for our children. We're going to have to understand that that can't be as flippant a behavior as it may have been before when the kid had a sniffles or a cough. But we will continue, as I said before, you know, anybody who shows signs of any kind of illness, we're still going to have them go to the nurse, and that individual their temperature would definitely be taken at that point, and they would be, you know, the nurse would talk to them about symptoms, and then, you know, appropriate steps would be taken. I think it's important also to mention that there are a lot of non-COVID related symptoms that match the COVID symptoms. You know, if my child has seasonal allergies and sneezes when the pollen count is high, that's not a COVID-related symptom of sneezing. If I just began randomly sneezing, and I don't really know why, and I don't, you know, it's sort of out of character or out of nature, then that's where you have to say, I wonder why they're sneezing. If we know they're sneezing because they have seasonal allergies, then that's not a COVID-related symptom, that's allergies. And we're going to continue to have kids with colds and coughs and you know, regular old fevers and regular old flu and those types of things, and we still have to treat those appropriately and support kids at home and keep them home when they're sick. So all of that will continue to be a part of the normal interactions at school. But it's going to require all of us to kind of step up our game and really understand that there's a more significant impact of sending your kid to school when they are ill, regardless of why they're ill during these times.
Yeah. If a family chooses distance learning, will they still have music, PE, art class meetings?
So yeah, and again, what that looks like, you know, it's going to be different. You you know, what does PE look like in a remote way? Well, sometimes it's going for a jog, sometimes it's exercising, sometimes it's playing a game with a sibling or a neighbor or a parent. It's certainly not the same as kicking and, you know, playing soccer at school and those kinds of things. But those experiences will be there. Art and music are a little bit easier for kids to participate in a recorded or a live streamed lesson. PE at some point, if it has to be inside, is going to be the best we can make it. You know, kids love doing the go noodle, those kinds of dance and movement breaks. They, you know, calisthenics, yoga, stretches, those can be done in a classroom setting. Not ideal, but better than not doing anything. And again, kids at home can participate in those activities as well. So to the extent possible, people at home are either live streaming or viewing the recorded or picking an independent activity.
Okay. How will teachers ensure students learning from home are as engaged?
Yeah, so that's really where we're looking at doubling up, where we have, you know, the core classroom teacher is going to be the same for in school as at home, but then we have additional support staff who will be reaching out to kids throughout the days and connecting with parents to look at more of the, you know, how's it going? Do you have any questions? You need any extra help, support, and be providing some of that kind of an as needed basis. The fact that the students' participation is live in and of itself is a little bit more engaging. Again, I know we heard some stories about some middle schoolers taking advantage of the late start to their day and just kind of checking in once or twice. But if they're going to be participating in the lesson, they're going to have to be up and watching it or engaged in it. All of the students will go back to our standard grading process. So that's another engagement incentive for our students, that the work that they're doing is going to be assessed, and there'll be tests and quizzes and assignments to turn in and all those kinds of things as well. So the distance learning 2.0 really, and I can't stress this enough, is really a much more robust and a much different kind of experience than what we did in the spring.
If participating in distance learning, about how much time will be spent synchronous versus asynchronous, and what time will synchronous instruction begin and end each day, and at the same time in-person school starts and finishes?
To the greatest extent possible, yes. I mean, I think that's the framework. The routine is going to be that it'll mirror the hours of school. Again, we know that there are some families that won't be able to be home in the morning. They may have their child in some other kind of care with a loved one, and then they're working, and they come home after second shift, and that's when the kids jump on and get work done. So to that extent, there'll be, you know, access to recordings and the other materials, but for the most part, the goal will be live at least sort of intermittently throughout the day. I think it's also fair to say that it's going to look different by grade levels and by independence of student work, as well as the screen time. You know, a kindergartner's not you know going to be able to be super engaged for a long period of time watching from a distance. So we're going to have to embed more hands-on, more interactive kinds of lessons for those kids. So it'll differ a little bit between grade levels, but mirror school as much as possible.
I agree. Okay, we have a few, those were the questions that were sent in. We have a few questions that came through the chat.
All right, we have 10 more minutes on the timer.
Yeah. All right, so what about the 10-day symptom-free stipulation that was on the YouTube video? Is this for any symptom, like an earache, a bellyache, etc.?
No, it's for a COVID-related symptom. So that's if the doctor says yeah, I'm not really sure why you've got this earache and why you're coughing and wheezing. It doesn't sound like it's anything I would expect. It could be COVID. That's going to trigger that sort of 10-day symptom-free mark. But, doctors will be able to give notes that says, yeah, Billy has, he had strep throat. He took his penicillin, his medicine, and ran that course, and that's what it was. He's fever-free. He can come back to school, and that's as typical. So other than the fever regulation now, but so the doctors really will indicate whether that symptomology is connected to COVID or not.
Okay, are the school issued masks required, or can they use a mask from home?
Can certainly use a mask from home. I know I was just again at Mariano's, I saw a little 2-year-old in a stroller with a tiny little baby face mask on. It was both adorable and depressing all at once. But, obviously if there are things that kids are wearing over the summer that you're getting them used to, that's perfectly fine. The mask requirement is that it fits snugly over the nose and mouth. And there are lots of really cool styles. And of course, everybody is marketing, my wife's going to get a Vera Bradley face mask. Everybody's marketing like crazy. So if there's something that's more appealing to kids, that's great. We're trying to get some that are reusable so that you can take one off, throw it in the washing machine, and then wear a new one to school the next day, and then kind of rotate as necessary. I should say, and this wasn't here, but elsewhere, we do have some emergency paper masks. If it's like I completely forgot, mom just drove away and my mask is still in the car. We'll have those kinds of temporary fixes for kids. But, for the most part, if parents want to provide their own, you're certainly welcome to do so.
The next question is a 2-part question. As this will not be as rigorous, will we still test in conjunction with nationwide standards? And can we request students who do socialize outside of school regularly be placed in the same class as to limit exposure?
The first part of the question in terms of comparison to national is, that really our kids are no different than kids in Arizona and Florida and New York and Kansas. Everybody is coping with this new normal. So we anticipate national averages to adjust as well. I know there was a lot of people talking about how far behind kids will be. They won't be behind. It's just going to be a new normal. Everybody paused. You'd only be behind if the rest of the world moved forward and only Illinois took a break. So as far as that national norming will go, we'll still be within that same national norm data set. As far as scheduling for outside of school socializations, I can't, I don't think I could promise that. It's something we could think about how we might do, but I think that'd be difficult to factor in those other variables to our already complex scheduling system.
And just to clarify about the rigor too, we are focused on grade level standards to the greatest extent possible. What we're looking at is possibly compacting some of the standards and hitting some of the higher hitting standards within a school year, because because of the hand washing times, entrance, we will have to adjust some of how we go about with our pacing and structure, but it will be grade level work to the greatest extent possible. Also allowing for some of that differentiation of like students who need some extra support, and as well as our students who are needing some acceleration. Obviously, we're hitting the goals of the IEP if your student has an IEP. So just to clarify that one.
The standards, too. Yeah. I just in looking at the participants, I see Mr. Raminsky, our director of buildings and grounds, and we haven't talked so much about cleaning protocols. I'm wondering if you can just we only have 5 minutes left. Kind of briefly describe some of the new product line that we have elected to use that is more user-friendly and more efficient in sanitizing.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Angelaccio. We briefly talked about earlier about some of our protocols and procedures. We will be providing a new chemical system this upcoming school year. It's being installed next week. The disinfectant that we'll be providing does have efficacy against all viruses and bacteria typically found in schools, as well as human coronavirus, large envelope viruses such as SARS-CoV-2 and influenza A, and even more difficult viruses to kill, such as in bacteria such as norovirus and MRSA. So we're really excited to be able to introduce this to the district. Not only does it give us the efficacy against everything we're worried about now, COVID related, but it also meets some very stringent standards on safety for custodians, safety for our other staff members who are going to be providing supplemental cleaning and disinfection throughout the course of the day, which they have never done before, safety and health of our students who are going to be around more chemicals than they ever have been on a daily basis, and still being sensitive to individuals with asthma or other sensitivities. So we're really excited that we're able to identify.
Brian?
Yep. Oh, sorry. Other Brian? But we're really excited to be able to introduce this. We're really confident we're going to be able to provide a as clean and safe environment as possible for our staff and students this fall here. So.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah.
I see that we're coming down on the last couple of minutes. So if I may just recap, please encourage if you have questions, please submit them via that questions, comments, feedback form. If there are things that we haven't thought about, that's helpful to hear. If there are questions or concerns, share them there. We will try to get back to you in a timely manner. Please apologize if you have any friends or neighbors who tried to jump on after we had hit our 100 max. I think we were able to get most folks on, and we hovered right under, right at 197, 98. But please let them know that the recording will be posted on that website as well, so they can view and participate that. And if you didn't catch all of my jokes, you can review it as well in your leisure. Again, I want to thank everyone for your understanding, your flexibility. We've talked a lot about what we can and cannot promise. And I cannot promise that our plan is going to be perfect. I cannot promise that our plan is going to be ideal and error-free. But I can tell you that it is going to be the best effort that we can collectively put forth to try to provide for our students and families and staff in this crazy time. And I can also tell you that it's not going to be set in stone, that we will continue to refine and revise as we did in the spring, where we had to make modifications to our plan. So thank you again very much for participating. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions, and or if you have follow-up, please submit those. Thank you all very much. Thanks to my administrative team, my board members for participating, and we'll thank staff who we kicked off so they can make more spaces later. Thank you all very much again, and I hope you have a great night.
Night, everybody.